Well, hey guys, welcome back. Let's keep things fun today, and let's get back started with talking about the topic that everybody loves talking about and brings us all together: politics and the election.
A little light topic, right?
So you may have heard that there was an election here recently.
I did,
and there might have been a few ads on TV.
And text messages.
And maybe a couple text messages.
I got calls as well.
Did you?
A lot of calls.
Aren't you lucky?
Yeah, I figured if I got a call, it would totally change the way I'm going to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yes.
Definitely. So, now that we're post-election, I think in all seriousness, this really does have a big impact on our industry. And, we're talking about 2025, and we're talking about some of the key issues. Some have called 2025, when it comes to politics, the Super Bowl of taxes. When you're talking about policies and the impact that some of the programs that have been in place since 2017 are expiring at the end of 2025, that impact businesses in our industry. I think we're looking at the results of the election, having an impact on that. And, and I want to get your thoughts on this as it relates to the industry and the outlook for 2025, and just share some of what I've heard as well. So, I think some of the key issues are around taxes.
Absolutely.
And as equipment rental business owners, the ability to depreciate your assets in year one, one part of the jobs, JCTA, I think that's that is a key tax policy that is set to expire in 2025. But I think just from what I've been hearing, I think now there's good reason to believe that some of those policies will be renewed with Republicans controlling the White House, the House, and the Senate. Have you guys heard anything
and the judicial?
The judicial.
I've heard some of that too. I mean, I guess the frustration that I have is, and I think your Super Bowl analogy is great, because it always feels like one team trying to crush the other. And it is super tiring. I mean, beyond the wasted time from the text messages and the phone calls and all of that kind of stuff, it hurts business. John Durante said it many episodes ago. I've actually now seen it in the data, in my own data, and I've looked at other people's data. Like this back and forth, we hate each other, we're going to rip out everything that everybody did before us mentality really destroys business for us. It slows things down. You can see it in the data. The business slows down nationally when we're in an election year, heading more and more towards an election. Businesses can handle information. They can adapt to it. And I think we're going to talk about how we're going to adapt to some of this. What we can't handle is uncertainty. And when people get on stage and say, I'm going to rip out whatever the last person did and put in all these other crazy things, it just creates chaos for us. And that to me is probably the bigger problem, is the pain that we create going into the elections, not necessarily the pain that we feel when we come out of the election, no matter who gets elected. Like it's terrible. And an example from having done some lobbying with the rental industry in my own life is I remember sitting in a congressional person's office, and we were working on making an improvement to the Affordable Care Act because it was unfairly taxing small businesses.
Yep.
And everybody agreed. Everybody agreed. It was a bipartisan issue. Small businesses were being hurt. Everybody loves small businesses. And we're sitting in that room, and they were like, yeah, we're not going to fix that. And I'm like, why would you not fix that? And they were like, well, don't you want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act? And it's like, I don't have an opinion on that today, because my problem is this is hurting me right now, and we all agree we can fix it. Yeah, we just want that to crash and burn. That's the best solution. Is if we don't do anything to make it better, it's going to be so bad that we can get rid of it. And it's not just them, because it was on both sides. Because then that meeting was interrupted because one side had ticked off the other side, and so they called a procedural meeting for the House so that they had to go vote that they were going to have a vote later. And so they were literally just wasting everybody's time because they were mad at each other. And like that kind of stuff, that hurts businesses. You know, we can deal with everything we're about to talk about in the actual politics and how things are going to play out. Some of them might be good, some of them may be bad. Mm-hmm. But what we can't deal with is this, this situation where we're going to say and act like we're going to do all these crazy things, and who knows what's actually going to happen. So that's my rant.
Okay.
Elliott, you want to add to that?
I do. I think it's a great insight. I think you're exactly right. I will give you the fact that I think as the politics, and I'm going to call it a flip-flop, do whatever they want, even if it goes Republican or it goes Democrat. I think the flip-flops, I think you're exactly right. We've all heard the phrase, it's an election year, and we see the slowdown, and you're exactly right. I think you phrased it perfectly. It's not necessarily that people don't want to do business or are afraid to do business, is that they're uncertain what policies will affect. And I think when you could see right after the election, stock market took a huge surge. Mm-hmm. A lot of my key customers that I work with, some of my favorite clients, said literally the day after the election, they saw a surge in equipment sales where people were holding off on whether or not they were going to buy equipment, big purchases. And they said, you know what? I believe in the policies that are going to go forward under a Republican Party. I'm going to go in and I'm going to make $500,000 to $1 million worth of equipment purchases, which I think is huge. I agree that uncertainty, that stagnation messes with everybody. I think under a unified, and I'm not going to get into hardcore politics, but the fact that it's all Republican, I think that whatever policies and procedures are going to come down, I think they're going to be more streamlined, and there's going to be less resistance, where a lot of times when the House and the executive and the judicial, when they're all split up, I think we waste even more time. And I think what everybody's excited about is not necessarily that it went Republican or Democrat, and we all have strong opinions on that, is that the fact that it's all Republican and it's all unified, I think that there's going to be less wasted time when things, processes and procedures, like you mentioned, the voting to have a vote, hopefully for 4 years that will be streamlined. And we even saw that one of the things that Trump put in with Elon Musk and that whole thing is streamlining the government. And I think he's given them a few hundred days to go in and cut all the waste that's going on in the government. And the government's going to be ran more like a business. And with that, I think business owners are thinking it'll be smarter spending, better investments. We're already seeing interest rates go down, which I think for the equipment side is critical.
Totally.
Everyone that's buying equipment, I can tell you right now, last year at the show, and we were both at the ARA show last year down in New Orleans, it was not exactly the same type of show. There was a lot of people looking at equipment, but the POs and the ordering was not nearly at the scale it had been in prior years. Mm-hmm. I actually think with the interest rates coming back down below 5%, and I'm assuming that they're going to continue to drop, I think this year could be a really good show. And I think the next 4 years could be great for the equipment industry because the demand is there. The government spending from COVID, we know that was there was stimulus packages that came in. How that money is spent and how it affects the economy, I think we're in for 4 years that is going to really benefit construction and growth in America, which we will see the repercussions of that.
I think the market is just ready for that. I think that a lot of the money has been on the sidelines this year.
Absolutely.
When it comes to the construction industry.
Well put.
And I think that, with that uncertainty, like Josh mentioned, I think that everybody was taking a wait and see approach.
Amen.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard that. I talked to one of my good friends who works for a pretty good sized general contractor in Chicago. They are involved in some of the mega projects in Chicago. Yeah. They also do a lot of work, in non-residential construction downtown. He said that their pipeline is already full for 2025. Yeah. So, they were, 2024, they still had projects going on, but they weren't at full capacity. 2025, they're already at full capacity. And, I think, Elliott, to your point, with equipment buying, the supply chain has really been on a roller coaster.
Yeah,
I mean, that's maybe the understatement of the day for the last 5 years. And, even when I was at Rental Max, we had so much equipment that we had brought in 22 and 23. Some of it that we thought was coming in 22, but ended up coming in 2023, that we weren't buying as much this year, regardless of what was happening with the business. And I do think that there's going to be a much stronger demand. And I read an article here recently in one of the construction magazines that fleet managers are expecting that the equipment fleet, supply to demand will start to balance out by about the third quarter in 2025. Right now, I think we're looking at an excess supply, whereas 2 years ago we were looking at extreme excess demand, and it's really taken that roller coaster over the past couple of years. The one part of the new administration that will be interesting and I think important for us to watch, while I think the tax policies, if those are renewed or close to what they have been for the last 8 years, that's a net positive for our industry.
Mm-hmm.
I think what could impact our industry on the negative side are tariffs. And so if tariffs,
absolutely,
if tariffs are put in place that impact the supply chain again, we talk about this roller coaster that we've been on, that could have an impact to us, farther down the line. Maybe not in 25, but maybe in 26 or 27 we start to see the impact of that. If I
think that's a great insight.
Steel is impacted from a manufacturing standpoint.
Well, and you and I talked about it last time. Like, one of the ways that independents are able to afford to deal with the inflationary cost of equipment is there's options for secondary suppliers or lower cost suppliers
Absolutely.
out there. We saw this happen with lifts a few years ago when a bunch of supply of lifts were taken out because of massive tariffs. It hurt independents. It hurt small rental companies. That's one of the things that I'm having to make decisions about with my equipment right now is how much do we really think that the tariff is going to impact the particular manufacturer that I'm working with parts, with service, with new equipment, because it's not, I don't want to get a manufacturer this year or next year, and then 3 years from now, we start to run into problems with that manufacturer.
Right.
And the other problem is it's so convoluted. Even some of the major suppliers build equipment in China. I understand.
Oh, absolutely.
I understand that the U.S. and China, for many reasons, want to, disagree on some things and figure some things out. And tariffs are a tool, and they could just be a great negotiating tool for that. But they could also be a really painful thing for companies like us that have to buy heavy machinery that's manufactured at least partially outside of the U.S.
I 100%. I think that's a great insight. I think the tariffs are going to have a big impact. And I realize in the long term, great, bring the jobs back to America. The tariffs obviously keep things being built in America. But right now the gap would come about is that where you can get a lot of equipment cheaper, like you stated, from overseas, and there's pluses and minuses with getting it overseas. Lower price, harder to get parts, more diversified fleet. There's a lot of factors that play in. But if you're getting it 30%, 40% less than if you bought a comparable American-made brand, and let's just call, a spade, you can get an American scissor lift, and where that's costing you $12,000, or you can get a Chinese scissor lift, and that's costing you $7,000 or $8,000. And you start looking at some of those expenses, and now if the tariffs come into effect, how will that affect it? And it could be, like you're thinking, a huge one is that the next 2 years, you say, well, it's a cheaper option. I'm going to buy Chinese-made stuff. But then the tariffs come into effect, and you either can't buy more, or importing the parts to take care of your fleet goes up exponentially. Yeah. And it really hurts those companies that are trying to compete against the big five.
So you sold an American manufacturer, and I'm all for American manufacturing and buying American-made products. I think that's great when it makes sense. I think there's a reason that the iPhone is designed in the U.S. and made in China. Do you think that Americans can manufacture construction equipment anywhere near the same price as other parts of the world?
So, yes and no. And here's why I say that. I truly believe that if we make American-made products, it brings our entire economy up. And here's what I think is that if we're making American-made products, I got to tour some amazing manufacturers, OEMs, actual facilities, from Cat to Snorkel to I went to Genie. I got to go to all these amazing factories and watch this equipment get made. And here's the thing. Are they more expensive? Yes. But then at the same time, it's easier to get parts. It's less expensive to maintain when you have less downtime. You have a higher amount of fleet utilization. And then I truly believe that if it stimulates the U.S. economy and it stimulates U.S. jobs and they make more U.S. manufacturing facilities, in the long term, is it keeps that as much of that business in the U.S. and it becomes an overall stimulus over 10 years, where the more stuff we send out of the country, we're cutting down on some of the jobs. We're becoming a less industrial nation, which I think is what America is built on. And we've become more of a software and technology industry, which is it can be very frivolous. You know what I mean? I mean, it doesn't take a lot. I've had to develop stuff, and you can have somebody in the Ukraine develop a website for you overnight at 1/5 the price of the United States. So I think if there's any way to control that and keep the money in America to help American families, I'm all about it.
So short-term pain for long-term gain.
Amen.
Essentially. So I think then that goes back to, one of the things that I like about the complexity that these potentially massively disruptive tariffs put out there, and the fact that interest rates aren't crazy low again yet, is I don't know that there's any reason to believe that rental companies aren't going to try and keep increasing supply, trying to increase their business. I don't know a whole lot of rental companies out there that are like, I'm projecting a down year next year, so I'm going to defleet. Nobody's out there defleeting.
They're not.
And I think we're at a kind of a level here where we have enough fleet to meet demand. So if demand doesn't come up as fast as the fleet does, we're going to be putting more pressure on ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like that it doesn't look perfectly rosy, because if we all went out there and bought equipment tomorrow, then I think we'd all be really hurting each other.
I will tell you the biggest thing that I'm seeing right now, and great insight on your part, is the industry as a whole overfleeted, and it's like my wife taking me to the grocery store when I haven't had dinner. It's just a bad decision.
Yes.
I overbuy. And the thing is, I think everybody was buying really intelligently amongst the industry. And then when those big shortages, you mentioned, over demand, not enough fleet, when that happened, John, we bought fleet. And the problem is it would have been fine, but everybody bought 10% too much.
Mm-hmm.
And that 10% too much as a universal has now made that we had a little bit too much fleet. And the biggest thing I can tell you is I think it's twofold. It's not only that we have too much fleet, I think that as an industry, and I'm calling out sales, and it's what I'm in, I think sales got very comfortable with, you could just answer your phone and you got the business. If nobody has fleet, if nobody has supply and demand is high, then whoever has fleet wins. And so I think that a lot of sales reps, a lot of organizations felt it was more important to answer their phone, and they don't know how to go out and hunt anymore. And I think the differentiating factor for the next 2 to 3 years is going to be who knows how to go out and hustle for the level of service, hustle for the customers, and bring back, it's not just about fleet, it's an overall customer experience.
No doubt about that. I think now's the time to do it. I mean, we're coming toward the end of the year here. I know that depending on where you are in the country, for some, especially for our business in the Midwest, this is the time of year where things start to slow down. But that's really the time to prepare for next year. And when we talk about what next year is going to look like, I think the key for anybody out there, and I mean, Elliott, you do a phenomenal job with your clients in sales training is what can you do? What can you control when maybe the business is slowing down? Maybe customers don't have as many projects going on, but guess what? March and April are going to be here before we know it. And those who are hunting, those who are working and building those relationships and saying thank you for your business this year, and who's better to forecast how our rental businesses are going to do next year than our customers, because that's what we did and kind of preached this time of year is, all right, what are we looking at? What are we budgeting for next year? Well, how are our customers forecasting and budgeting for next year? Let's talk to our key customers, and what kind of projects are going to be hot next year. I think there's been some talk about residential construction has been the weakest segment, for the past couple of years. It was the hottest segment, right? Coming out of COVID, home sales, residential construction. Everybody was putting up a deck or a pool or a fence. Everybody was was putting money into their house, and I know that we felt that.
Absolutely.
Anybody in the general rental space felt that. Are you guys hearing that? Or, I'm interested to to just talk about what is driving that demand. I think we're looking at maybe a little bit slower growth next year is what is being forecast through ARA Rentalytics.
Yep.
More like 5 to 6% instead of 7 to 8%. What are you guys hearing? What are you guys seeing out there from from a forecasting growth demand standpoint?
So on some level, for me, it's cautious optimism. And I say that because I want to go back to the number that Elliott threw out. He said that he feels like rental companies overbought by 10%. And I don't think that that's probably that far off. I think that's a pretty educated guess. If it's 10%, and you just mentioned 5 to 6% growth next year, then we're talking about 2026 before we hit equilibrium.
Amen.
Of fleet.
Yep.
It could take a while to dig out of this. And so while I think things will start to feel better, I think things will start to get better. And I think that those strategies that you talked about are winning strategies in an up market or a down market, because we're going to have both. I am still a bit concerned about the amount of supply that's out there and how that's going to impact any of these positive tailwinds that we have, because we have such a strong negative tailwind with the other part. Now, on the positive side, for residential as a segment of the overall construction equipment rental industry, I would say something's got to happen. We're pulling a rubber band again. Everybody did their backyard oasis, and then they took a break, and they haven't done anything because of high interest rates, but they've got incredible amounts of home equity. And some of them have been called back to the office and don't want to move, or haven't moved, or delaying moving, or they've added size to their family, or they've downsized their family. They need to move. People need to move occasionally, and they haven't been doing that because interest rates have felt so terrible. Even though historically they're not bad, they felt so terrible compared to the payments that they have locked in now.
Brilliant.
Nobody's moving around. And when do people do that backyard oasis? Redo the kitchen, redo the bathroom. They make those kind of adjustments that they've wanted to do. They either do a little bit before they sell it, so it looks good to sell.
Amen.
Or they do it when they buy it to put their stamp on it. So I think that the lowering interest rates, the time that we have had for people to forget what it felt like to have a 3% home interest rate, because we're probably not going back there again for a while. You just need to forget.
If ever.
Yeah. I think some of that time will start to drive next year the small contractor, the home remodeler, some home building, those types of things, if we don't get crazy overfleeted in that stuff. And we get crazy overfleeted, then we're still going to deal with the same issue. So I think it's super optimistic from the demand side, as long as supply doesn't overreact to the positive news there.
And I'm going to tell you, thank you. I'm going to tell you both, thanks. I tell you guys to drop the mics, but they're permanently affixed. I'll tell you the biggest thing that I'm seeing right now is that a lot of rental companies right now are facing the challenge, which is new. And it's not new to those of us that are veterans in the industry, but in the last 6 months, we are actually starting to see some of the rental companies and some of the big five either doing headcount reductions, or I've even seen some of the big ones where people are coming in. Just last week as I was running around the country, and this morning I asked, what's the biggest challenge you face? And they said, rates are actually coming down, which people can't wrap their head around at all. And I sat there and I can't either, because I think interest rates being up, fleet costs being up, and operating costs being up, there's not a single reason out there to drop rates unless your utilization is such that you're willing to take a short-term loss, hoping that it's not as big as having fleet sitting in your yard that's not making money. So you'd rather take a little bit of a cut, deduction, lose a little bit of money over the short term with bad rates than have your equipment sitting in your yard because of the overfleeting for 6 to 8 months, or as you stated, at least a year, which I agree with, until it comes back to such a level that our utilization is back where it needs to be. And I think it's very, very interesting right now when you're watching companies that don't have the sales skills or don't have the relationships, as you stated, John, and they are already starting to reduce rates this quick into a transition. I mean, we're 6 months in and they're already resorting to dropping rates. That's something that's going to affect the market long term. I mean, we fought long and hard to get the increases that we did in 2022 and 2023, and the fact that they're going to surrender those up this quick is disturbing.
Well, and the equipment's not cheaper. So one of the things that was a real problem is equipment went up 30 to 40%. And I don't personally have an issue with that because your fleet didn't go up 30 to 40% in 1 year. Only 1/7 of your fleet went up 30 to 40%. And so it takes time for the increased cost to affect you. Mm-hmm. And so you have plenty of time to increase rates to get there. And we saw some increased rates that got us part of the way there. But we're still not back at equilibrium between the rates and the cost of fleet that we're at. And the solution, to your point, is yes, to sell better. You know, we want to be better salespeople, but it's still the same pie that you guys are talking about. You know, some of it's to be much more careful with your fleet purchasing and to be much more reserved with your fleet purchasing, because that's the only true profitable solution to that. Yes, you can try and steal more pie from your competitor, but it doesn't create more pie. Maybe you could argue that a better rental experience causes people to rent more than they buy, and over time that increases rental penetration, which is super valuable. But in the short term, the pie is not changing a whole lot. So we can try and sell better, but if everybody does that, we're going to be in the same spot if we have too much fleet.
So when you mention smarter fleet management, like how do we do that? Because I hate to say it, but I see people when literally they go walking around the ARA show, and trust me, I love the ARA show, but it's like sending my daughter into a candy store. It all looks good, and you end up with stuff when we get home, and I'm like, what is this? And she's like, I don't know, it's terrible, but it looked cool. And I think that some of us almost have that childish mentality of we go in and we look at equipment and somebody's like, you know, you should buy this and you should buy that. What's the key? Like, what is the key to doing smart fleet management? I mean, you did it for years.
Don't have an ego.
Yeah.
Explain yourself.
So as a sales rep, as a owner, as a business, every year doesn't have to be a bang up year. It doesn't have to be a growth year. It can be an operational improvement year. It can be a consolidation year. It can be a better, you improve your sales process year. But we have because we've had 20 years of average growth, we have such a perspective in the rental industry of, well, I need to add more fleet and I need to grow next year. And the sales rep, I need to rent more fleet and I need to grow next year. Well, maybe this isn't the year to do that. Maybe this is the year to improve your business practices, to be more careful. And I think that it is easy to get stuck in the excitement and ego-drivenness of, well, you know, my fleet went from 100 million to 200 million this year, or whatever happened to you.
I'm going to lean in real slow. I'm pretty sure that the ARA calls that the market movers list.
That's
and
right.
Our goal is to be on the market movers list. Are you telling us that the market movers list should not be ego-driven?
I mean, that is certainly something that drives an ego, without a doubt.
It is.
And don't I want to be on it? I mean,
but you don't.
Don't we all want to be on it? But
for the right reasons.
We can't all be on that list. And getting too exuberant about some of these changes isn't going to dig us out of the hole. We want to be smart as an industry on how we do this. Let the more successful players take market share, but as a whole, we need to be careful. If the industry is only growing 5%, that means on average we can only grow our fleets 5%. And if we've already overbought 10%, then on average we don't get to buy anything this year, on average.
So how do the small guys compete with the big five?
Well, I would say the most obvious answer to that is if you don't have $1 billion, don't try and compete in a $1 billion game. Play a different game.
So how do you find your chunk of the market? How do you find your place in the market and grow it and succeed when the big five are trying to encroach on your territory?
I think you have to look at your best customers, and I think you have to look at your best categories. So I think like what Josh is talking about is really being strategic with fleet management as rental companies. And if you have, hopefully you have access to your data, and you can look at and analyze your data for, who are our best customers? What is that customer profile? What equipment are they renting? And then I think that's where you can really get more strategic about how you grow your business. Unless you're getting 100% market share from those customers, from those type of customers in your market, there's room for growth there. You look at your best customers, and are you getting all of their rental business? Is there an opportunity for you to to go out and, let's say you're only getting half of their rental business, and if you had 100%, that might be a top 5 customer for you. Do you have the equipment to be able to do that? That was a question that we were constantly asking ourselves, is how do we become more of a one-stop shop? Maybe you can't be fully a one-stop shop depending on the size of your business, but how do you become more of a one-stop shop for that customer? Sometimes it's not always about getting new customers or new business. Yeah. But that's part of it. I mean, you have to get new business, but I think again it comes back to making sure that you're meeting your customers where they're at and what they need. And a lot of times for smaller independent rental companies, those are customers that you're willing to work for. I think that's how you can position yourself where they're not even going to think about going to someone else.
I'll tell you the number one thing that I saw when I got to, and thank you for having me come up to Rental Max. It was awesome. And you were one of my first clients. So I appreciate that tremendously. You took a risk early, and thanks for investing in me.
Well, we would have brought you back.
I got you. So I'm going to tell you something I learned from you. So I went in there, and the one thing you did, and you embraced it wonderfully, was you sat there and you just made the comment, and you said, find your best categories. And I think if you're going to grow and you're going to compete against the big five, everyone tries to be everything to everyone. And I think that's a crock, because you can't be everything to everybody. You can't go out and say, I'm going to cover everything that Kiewit wants, because you just can't. Even United can't. And you can't say, well, I'm going to just do certain things, but you can take a vertical business segment and specialize in it. And it warped my mind when I went up there. Your sales manager came from the snow removal landscaping business. And he was a mastermind at it. And I showed up to your yard, and I kind of sat there, and I was like, oh, this is an interesting fleet, not what I normally see. I'm going to take an education from it. And he walked me through, and he explained snow removal. He explained some of the small tractors, salt spreaders, all the things where he specialized. And the number of skid steers you had out in the winter months was the largest number I've ever seen in any market. And I sat there and I said, this is brilliant. They found their vertical business segment, and it was in landscapers, where they said, look, we're going to find our niche, we're going to cater to them, and we're going to dominate it. And I was like, holy crud, this is a lesson to me, because I watch all these rental companies and they're like, oh, well, I want to take care of the drywaller, and I want to take care of the electrician, and I want to take care of the landscaper, and I want to take care of the tree trimmer, and I want to take care of the... Stop. Figure out what you're really good at, and you don't need to buy 80 different categories of fleet and and a number of different codes, all you need to do is say, what are we really good at? What can our salespeople go and get? And what are we going to attract that does a great job? You know what I mean? Like there's a reason why within the ARA, party rental is separate than equipment rental. It's a different customer base. And I think we need to think the exact same thing is, how do you strategically find those customers and cater your business so that they know Rental Max and John get me. Northside Rentals and Josh get me. And they're going to become deadly loyal because they understand that you're catering your business to better serve their business. I think that's how you compete with the big five.
Yeah, I like how you said that, because that's really embodying what I was trying to say when I say you try and play a different game. You know, if I was a large national rental company, then it would be a different game that I was playing. I get why you go after the data centers, why you go after the Skanskas, because that is a very efficient business model for you. You know, but if you're an independent local rental company, that is not an efficient business model for you. Maybe you could be the best secondary supplier on a job site like that, but how do you own a data center? How do you own a mega project if you're not a mega company, you know, that is really good at serving other mega companies? And so a lot of it, you know, kind of tabling the pessimism I had for where the market is going, when we're talking about just winning in any market, I think it is just that. It's knowing who you can serve that's underserved. And how to serve those people.
Say that. That was powerful. Say that one more time.
Knowing who was served and underserved. Or knowing who was underserved and serving them. See, it doesn't sound as good the second time.
I'm going to tell you right now. So here's exactly what you said. You said knowing who is underserved and knowing how to serve them.
I like that.
That is so powerful.
But I'm going to extend upon that.
It is. It really is the key.
I'm going to extend upon that. It's not just customers. It's also your staff. It's also the people you hire.
Explain yourself.
So what we need to find, because the one thing that a smaller rental company can do that larger rental companies can't do is be creative, live in the gray space. You know, scale makes creativity complicated. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I think about Erica, who does workforce at ARA, was working in some prisons recently in Alabama, and they were certifying diesel mechanics coming out of it. You know, not high risk people, but people coming back for reentry. And it's really hard for a national rental company with a lot of rules and regulations to hire those folks. I had some great felons on staff. I have had a marketing person on my team who I never could have afforded, but they needed to be able to stay home and take care of their kid part-time.
That's right.
That's not somebody who's going to be able to work in a corporate office in a large national rental company. So I'm saying find your customers where you can win, where you can be the most important. Is it credit challenged? Is it Spanish speaking? Is it landscapers? Is it oil and gas if you have the right connections in the right area? What market can you do better for whatever reason than somebody else? And when you're serving them, what type of team member can you bring on that is really complicated for somebody else to bring on? Not limited to those that I gave as examples, but that same space. Who's underserved that you can serve in your business?
That's powerful.
It
right?
really is, because I'll tell you right now, that's one of the things. Is it's funny because there's a lot of rental companies out there, and they're like, we have 3 sales reps. We know that they need sales management. We have a branch manager that's managing our branch who doesn't have time to go out in the field and do all the sales stuff. And they've literally, like, I find companies where they're like, look, we can bring you in for 1 week and help manage and structure our sales team and help us with temporary solutions. It's people who are outsmarting the system. You're exactly right. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's exactly what companies are doing. They're finding non-traditional labor to fill all those gaps to make their business more efficient.
And there's a big opportunity too with, I think, what you can do with your team, in going out and getting that business. So, you're bringing the right people into the right seats on your team. And I think this is where, Elliott, you've been able to help out a ton of companies. And where I would, really highlight one of the successes that we had at Rental Max is with our business development team, building that out we would not have had the growth we had without doing that and without having the right strategy. Going out and finding, those underserved markets, that just doesn't walk in your door. I think, maybe sometimes they do walk in your door once, but I think as rental businesses, if you're trying to compete and you're trying to get that business and make sure that business is coming to you every time, you have to be proactive about it, because so many companies are not. Josh, I know that's how you're thinking, and I know that that's an opportunity for you to continue to help Northside grow in Atlanta, is to be more proactive about it, get your team thinking more proactively about it, and everybody on the team can be a salesperson. Everybody at Rental Max was at least introduced to the idea that when they're working with a customer, they're the face of Rental Max. They're the face of the company. And you have drivers out there in the field. Your mechanics are often out in the field. Obviously, your store managers and your counter staff are working with customers every day. Those are all opportunities to build a deeper relationship with your customers, and the right type of customer that you can have come back to your business every time.
That's really powerful, because I think too many people forget the fact that every one of us, there's a book that came out, and the book was called Unreasonable Hospitality. And I loved the book. And Unreasonable Hospitality, he literally, every single person that worked, and he talked about a restaurant, but I sat there and, it's a question of your level of intelligence that you can take an unrelated field like hospitality, a restaurant, and apply it to the rental world. And he's said exactly what you said, John, to a T, is he's like, people miss the importance of how the valet interacts, how the hostess interacts, how the person cleaning the table next to your table does the job. I mean, do they walk over and throw all the plates in a big tub and walk off and it screws up your dinner? Or does everything just miraculously disappear quietly and it has no effect on your thing? And so when you make the comment of how important you are the face of your rental company, you're spot on. And it's funny because he built a the number one ranked restaurant in the world, thinking the way you think, which is everybody is an opportunity to make a wow impression with our customers. And do we all do that? I don't know, but how often are you coaching your people in the rental world of the importance of a driver, the importance of a field service tech, the importance of the yard guy loading it up on your truck, and how significant important do you make your customers feel? Because I think some of the big five can't do that.
Well, and see, I think that's one of those places too where you're figuring out how to play a different game. If I am a large rental company and I am trying to win a mega project, I'm going to hire an Elliott and I'm going to sick him on it, and it's going to work brilliantly, right? But if I'm dealing with a landscaper that does $10,000 a year, that model breaks completely.
Absolutely. Right.
And so when you figure out what those markets are that are underserved, then you have to figure out how to serve them differently and what works for them. And I think more inside sales, more counter sales, more relationships with the branch managers, counter people, drivers is a good way to do that. But the other thing that we haven't talked about, so we've talked about taxes. Sounds like net positive, probably. Not exciting, but net positive. We've talked about tariffs. Maybe, we're not sure yet.
We're not sure.
Government spending.
Depends on how it plays out.
Something to pay attention to.
What about immigration? Do you think immigration is going to affect the rental industry?
Well, I think that's a great question, Josh. Let's cover that in our next episode.